Okay, as promised, here we go. Okay, so our question of the day was, at a bakery, the ratio of a dozen cookies sold to cakes sold is 7 to 4. How many cakes are sold if 42 cookies are sold? So right now it's telling you that it's giving you a ratio. So you know you have to set up a ratio. And by the end of the notes, you will know how to solve this if you don't already. So the first thing you're going to begin is you're going to pull out your important information and go ahead and get your first ratio set up. And then you're going to use equivalent ratios to help you solve this problem. So our objective today was, I will use my previous knowledge about equivalent fractions to find equivalent ratios. And remember that we talked about that equivalent means equal. So that's this over here. So we know that 1/4 equals 4/8. So those are equivalent fractions, they're equivalent ratios because they have the same value. The numbers are different, but the value is the same. They both represent half or 50%. So if I cut this up into 2, it looks the same as if I cut this up and shaded it into 4. Another way to show that it is equal is that if I can do my cross product. 2 times 4 is 8, and 8 times 1 is 8. And remember that we talked about equivalent ratios were proportions, because a proportion is an equation with equal ratios. And it's an equation because it has an equal sign. So right here, even though we're talking about equivalent ratios, we're still talking about proportions. Okay? So again, proportions and equivalent ratios are pretty much the same thing. Well, they are the same thing. And it's in a proportion because it's an equation. An equation with equal ratios. Go ahead and pretend this word that is not here. Okay. So you should be able to do this practice right here on your own, because that's just a review of what ratios were. And remember a couple things. Order matters. Whatever it asks for first, that's what you put first, not whatever you decide. And that when you're writing your ratios, check to see if you can reduce, especially if you do it but you don't see your answer. Well, see if you can reduce. And remember, when you're reducing, all you're doing is creating an equivalent ratio. Okay, so let's move on. So with ratios, we're able to predict. And what I mean predict is, okay, you're going to guesstimate. So we have these same ratios, okay? So if I had another bag of 100 M&Ms, how many red would there be? So in my original, I have 5 red for every 20 total. So I want to know how many red, approximately, guesstimating, how many red would I have if I had 100 total? So some of you are probably already thinking, well, to get to 20, from 20 to 100, I have to multiply by 5, and that would be true. And I would think, if I do it to the bottom, I know you're probably like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired of hearing this. Yes, you do it to the top. So if 20 times 5 is 100, then 5 times 5 is 25. And yes, I did show y'all the algebraic way, and we'll get to that here in a minute. Okay, so the next one you had to do was, how many blue would there be? Okay, so if I have 1 blue and 20 total, and in my new bag I have 100, how many blue would I have? And since 20 times 5 is 100, and if you do it to the bottom, you do it to the top. I know you guys aren't rolling your eyes at me, even though I know you want to. But it's super important to remember that with ratios and fractions, that first you try to simplify, and that if you do it to the bottom, you do it to the top. Okay, so the next part that you need to do is you need to explain how to find equivalent ratios. So you'll start out with, to find equivalent ratios, you have to, and then you fill in the blanks. Thank you. Okay, moving on. So I know it seems like a lot, but we're going to go over it little by little. I just kind of wanted to give you an overall view of everything. So the next thing we moved on to was unit rate. And we know that unit means 1. And we also talked about how rate compares quantities measured in different units. And remember that quantities is amounts. And you're probably thinking, huh? So let me give you an example of what a rate is, okay? So let's look at our first example. And it says a 64-ounce bag of M&Ms costs $4.48. How much would 1 ounce cost? Okay, so a rate compares quantities measured in different units. So we're talking about a 64-ounce of M&M bags that cost $4.48. We are comparing these, but ounces and dollars really have nothing to do with each other. They're completely different, so they're different units of measurement. And you can measure something in ounces, and you can measure how much something costs. And we want to know per ounce, 1 ounce, and ounces go with ounces and dollars goes with dollars. And we put our variable right here because we don't know that. And remember that a variable represents an unknown. A variable is a number that we don't know, and that question helps us figure out where we put that variable. And you're probably thinking, well, that variable looks like a multiplication sign, so could I use something different? Yes, you can, if that helps you out. So then we do our cross product. We do 64 times x and 448 times 1. So then we need to get this variable by itself. We need to isolate the variable. So we use opposite operations, inverse operations. So this says 64 times x, and what's the opposite of multiplication? That is division. So if you do it to this side, you do it to the other side. So, and that 448 is the number that goes inside the box. Just because 64 is bigger, that doesn't mean it goes inside the box. The top dog goes in the house. So when you're dividing with decimals, for the most part, it's pretty much the same, except that you have a decimal. So make sure you bring that up and don't take shortcuts, because if you do, you'll mess up. All right, last problem. I've already gone ahead and set it up for you. Let's see if that you can go ahead and try to solve. Remember that after setting it up, labels are matching. We do our cross product to get our equation. All it's really asking is what times 16 can give you 64? Think about it. Make sure that you have these two questions, and then go back to answer this question right here. Remember, equivalent ratios and proportions are going to be your friends, and make sure that you have your labels because they're super important.